I'd like to have your attention. We're going to call the meeting to order. I'm Councilwoman Elaine Schwartz, and we are here for the Transient Guest Tax Committee meeting. And I will have the other council members introduce themselves and their presence.
Jeff Cohen, District 8.
Brendan Jensen, District 6. Thank you all for coming.
Okay, and our agenda, if you haven't gotten a copy, is available at the back. Our first call to order is to approve the minutes from the last meeting. I would entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Okay, Councilman Cohen and Councilman Jensen second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We go now to the third thing on the agenda, which is the Transient Guest Tax Review Board recommendations and discussion. I just want to tell you, I sat in on a little bit of this meeting. I think it happened for about 5 hours I can't even know what day it is yet. And so I first want to thank the review committee that came to this and sat there and talked about all 13 applications. We had 14 applications. It was a lot of hard work, and it made our job as council persons so much easier to do once we look at this recommendation. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Megan Bottenberg to kind of go over what the committee did and what conclusions they came up with.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Councilwoman Schwartz mentioned, we spent about 5 to 6 hours on Monday reviewing every single application, looking at the merits based on what the charge of the TGT committee gave to us at the prior meeting. And just to review, the review board consisted of 3 city staff members and 3 tourism industry representatives that the TGT committee chose at the previous meeting. The committee gave the charge to the review board that recipients of the TGT funds should demonstrate the ability to increase TGT funds, bring more tourists here to Topeka, and quantify a return on the investment. In addition, like I said, we received 14 applications, which totaled $15 million in requests. We only have $4.8 million over the next 12 years to allocate. We use the following criteria to prioritize each project: quantifiable return on investment, increase of TGT dollars in tourism, definitive plans of project and urgency, available funding from other sources, and diversification in projects to allow for greater expansion of tourism opportunities. Just to give you an overview of the process that we took, we reviewed each applicant and whether they met the criteria set forth by the TGT committee. Second, we prioritized and ranked the applicants: high priority, medium priority, and low priority. And finally, we determined the allocation of funds based on availability of funding and priority of projects. And again, I want to stress how we looked at every applicant and noticed how valuable each project was to the city of Topeka. If we could have funded everybody, we certainly would have recommended that. We chose to fund the top 4 priorities projects based on the funding available. And we recommended the following. The applicant for the downtown plaza requested $5 million. We recommend $3,435,000. For the Evel Knievel Museum, they requested $500,000 one time. We recommend $300,000. Constitution Hall, they requested $935,000. We reviewed and recommended they receive $350,000. And Jayhawk Theater, they requested $2.5 million. We recommended $680,000. Those that did not receive funding were still, like I said, considered valuable tourism projects. However, we took several things into consideration. First, we chose not to fund requests that were maintenance or for upkeep. And we also considered which projects already have received funding. Some applicants simply did not meet the full criteria of adding TGT dollars back into the Topeka economy and have a clear return on investment. And finally, it was the desire of the review board to diversify the funding application and fund a broad range of tourism attractions that expand our tourism opportunities here in the city.
Thank you. Megan, and the council members have any questions for Megan on how this all came about and or how the conclusions were made? Anyone? Okay, we'll move on then to the next thing on the agenda, which is to discuss the potential bonding if necessary. And then the second thing that we'll discuss discuss funding for profits. So Brandon, can you we have had some emails going back and forth about the bonding and if we do need to bond or if this amount is what we will be receiving and how this will be distributed, the funding.
Okay. Councilmember Schwartz and members of the committee, so specifically with bonding, what has been recommended to you today does not include bonding, and I can go over some of the issues that are associated with bonding. So bonding has been utilized in the past, and that was for a very specific project. That was for the Sunflower Soccer. So the city actually has title to the land in that case. They entered into a development agreement with Sunflower Soccer. It's a special assessment project, meaning that we actually assessed to the tax rolls on that property so that they have to make an annual payment for those bonds. That's structured over 12 years. That's also paid back through TGT funds. And let's say in the event that the TGT funds weren't enough to cover the bond payments or the special assessment payments on the tax rolls, then Sunflower Soccer would be responsible for anything above and beyond available TGT funds. So that has been utilized in the past. One of the tough things about utilizing debt with a very limited revenue source like this is you've got projected $4.8 million over the next 12 years. So there's a few things that go along with that affect the amount of projects that you can do. One of the things that you have to consider, and really that our bond counsel would have to consider, is whether the taxability of the projects and their relation to basically a public use of the facility. I can't tell you right now. It'd have to be very specific, and bond counsel would have to spend some time to look individually at each of the projects. So any numbers that I'm going to tell you today are assuming that the bonds would be a taxable and not a tax-exempt bond. In addition to that, the staff would recommend that if bonding was utilized, that we would utilize some type of coverage ratio. And basically, a coverage ratio, a standard coverage ratio is 1.25. We ran a few models, so I'm going to give you numbers based on a 1.1. Basically, what that ratio means is that we're expecting for the bond payments at 100%, that we're going to have revenues 10% over the expected bond payments, so that we have that gap there to have a coverage to ensure that the city general taxpayers are not on the hook for any bonds that have been issued. So these numbers are based on a 1.1 coverage ratio with the taxable bonds. To do that, if you had 4.7 million, it'd probably limit you to about $3.465 million in projects. So about 1.3 million would be eaten up by interest cost of issuance, and a coverage ratio for the bonds. In addition to that, there'd be required staff time for oversight of the bonds through engineering and finance to ensure that they're properly utilized. So based on those reasons, staff recommended to not utilize bonds in this case. And I think I wasn't there at the committee meeting, but I believe that they discussed that pretty thoroughly. And the recommendation that they brought forth today is just cash financing and no bonds associated with it.
Okay. One of the things that I covered when I was there at the meeting, because I think we had one of the review committees that hadn't really been sitting in on all of our TGT committee meetings, was the bonding that we had with the Sunflower Soccer, and that that's not completed yet, and we had some overage that at first we were kind of figuring into this amount of money, the 1%. So Brandon, you want to cover what's been decided then with that to leave that clean?
Okay, so initially we were talking about money for the Sunflower Soccer. At the time, Sunflower Soccer had not requested any additional projects for those funds. The council has appropriated those funds specifically by resolution for Sunflower Soccer. In addition, they've approved 2 projects, and we have a contract with Sunflower Soccer specifically dedicated to those 2 projects. They still have about approximately $600,000 left in the original budget authority that was granted by the council. They also requested that they be able to do additional projects that were part of the original package, but that they had to cut out because the bids that they were receiving at the time. So one of the things that we recommend is that Sunflower Soccer be able to move forward with the projects that have already been approved and authorized by the governing body. And then once those projects are done, we could come back and take another look at the additional funds that are going to go out, I think, for the next 17 years.
So there may be some funding that the TGT committee in the future may need to decide what happens with that.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. Our next thing on the agenda, but I also wanted to give the committee members that were here, I know I see Brett, I don't know if David's in the room, if there was any comments you wanted to make about any of the discussion. I know 5 hours of discussion was a lot of discussion, but I want to give the committee an opportunity to speak about how the process went, and then we can talk about the recommendations and how to act on those. So, anybody want to make comments about the process? Kurt?
It was a tough meeting. No, I really have nothing to add to what you said already.
Okay. Well, the next item that I asked to be put on the agenda was the discuss funding for for-profits out of city limit applications if necessary. This would be setting a precedent, much like what we kind of set a precedent when we funded a school, and then we also funded a church in the past that weren't, open to the public with they have to be made through arrangements with those entities. And I knew this would be the first time that we are funding a for-profit. And one of the things that we talked about at the committee was setting some strings attached to that. And I don't know what the committee came up with those recommendations, but maybe Nikki can follow up with some of those contractual ideas of what we put into with the fact that we would be giving money to a for-profit.
Thank you, Nikki Lee, Budget Manager. We really didn't get into details there. We figured we didn't have legal available, but really we can kind of write anything into a contract that this committee agrees to. So I think the thought was that once this committee has a recommendation and everybody agrees that that would be a recipient, then that would be the next step, and we could present that to you whenever we bring the resolution forward about who would be funded.
Okay. Representative Cole. I'm sorry, Councilman Jensen.
Mary, correct me if I'm wrong. We funded Heartland Park in the past, and they were a for-profit entity, were they not?
I don't know whether I don't know, Brandon, can you respond to that? I don't recall whether, we contracted with Jayhawk Racing, LLC, which is a private entity, and we gave transient guest tax funds to
so we
them.
have funded a for-profit company in the past.
We did. Of course, their purpose was to operate the Heartland Park on behalf of
And
the
that's
city.
true. I do agree.
You're
But-
correct.
So there is some precedent for funding for-profit companies, but we had a specific scope in which we were doing so.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
We also owned the property at that time, did we not?
Yes.
I'm not arguing. I want to make sure I'm completely clear on exactly how we're discussing that.
For-profits.
Thank you both.
Okay. Any other discussions on the funding of a for-profit and the fact that this would be, it would be setting a precedent with nothing that the city would be involved with. So my suggestions at the committee, and I think, as Nikki said, this would all be in contractual, would be some strings attached as far as if something happened, that we would be the first to be paid off from the funds that were being received. So we're hoping that it's very successful, and we have many tourists come into, you know, the museum, and then it generates many heads on beds. So, but do we need any other comment on that, or do we need to just move on with the discussion on that for-profit?
Say move on.
Okay. 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 So we are now to number 4. Oh, well, out of city limits, but the recommendations from, and we, you know, have the authority to discuss the recommendations and whether or not this is what we want, or we want to replace it with whatever. One of the applications was out of the city limits, and it was for a billboard, so to speak. We're hoping that we can, with the city, figure out doing signage that either through grants or through the budget process, but we would, I think the city wants to advertise our tourist attractions. So I think that's something that we will be continuing to discuss and figure out how that can be done. But there was a out of city limits application, and so since that really is not in the recommendation, we won't really further discuss that. So we're ready for approval of funding allocations, and I would open the floor to discussions by the council members.
Sure, I'll say something. I think it's kind of bad practice to borrow against the next 12 years. So I think whatever we allot today should be the $380,000. I think if we spread $380,000 across all of these projects, nobody's going to get anything done. So I would say we pick one, grant them the $380,000 that's left. That's what I would do.
My understanding is that we're not actually deploying funds that we don't have. So basically, we're just committing to give them a percentage of what we get each year, whatever that number would be. Correct me if I'm wrong. So we're not really borrowing. We're just saying, you know, here's what our estimated budget is. Here's your chunk of that estimated budget. But I would assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, if we come in less than 4.7 over the course of 12 years, and you know, they would get a adjusted amount. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, and that's another thing that would have to be decided by the committee. You could set caps. You could cap that amount, the total amount, or you could just say, based upon the percentages of the allocations that have been set, when finance goes and distributes the dollars, we would automatically distribute. So whatever we get in, we pay out based on a percentage of the total estimated allocations.
My concern is all of these projects are multi-million-dollar projects, and the ability to leverage these future funds makes fundraising substantially easier and would allow some of these projects to actually get going, because they could go to a bank or private donor and say, we have this much income over the next 12 years or 10 years or whatever we set today. So we're going to have that much. We just need your part to actually get us off the ground and going. I'm worried that if we, for one, make them come back every year and fight for it, then that detracts from the work of their project and their mission. So I'd really like to see us get it allocated, build in the caps, and have it set, and just let these guys get out there and get these done. Because I think you're right. If we don't give them enough to actually move the needle, then we're going to be in the same boat we are now, where we have all these wonderful projects that are not moving. We've got to get things moving.
One also, when you said not borrowing, maybe my terminology was wrong, but committing this money for the next 12 years, I think that's kind of the responsibility of the next TGT committee to decide how the money should be spent.
Well, if I may interject, that really, when when the TGT funds came about, they did commit, it's just like the Sunflower Soccer received a dedicated funding stream for how many years? 20 years. So that was kind of decided by that council at the time that, you know, this tax is going to go, you know, it's here to stay. So we're going to dedicate the funding stream. The same with the Overland Station, received $94,000 a year for 10 years or whatever. So I think that this council can make a decision. We pass the continuation for 12 years, and we can decide how that is to be spent, rather than every year coming back and saying, well, how are we going to spend the $383,000 this year? So, which I agree with, if you have a larger amount than just that $383,000 every year, you can do things like borrow money against, I mean, it's like having collateral that you know that you've got an arrangement with the city to get that amount of money.
And to meet you halfway in the middle, I would agree, you know, if these are the numbers recommended, let's cap it at that. And then if there's additional funds beyond that, which if these projects are successful and tourism increases, we would assume so, then it would be the TGT committee at that point who would then be responsible for allocating those additional
The
funds.
additionals?
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I'm good with that.
Yeah. Because I do agree with you. You know, we're sitting here and we're looking forward in the future, but we don't know what the future is. And I think you're right. We need to have some flexibility built in there. So if some really cool thing comes along, then we
A
can
lot of
react.
things will change in 12 years.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They'll change in 5 years. It's going to be great, especially if this stuff gets done.
Well, we had the discussion also, which I think we need to keep in mind. Topeka is pretty much in the middle of what other cities in Kansas are as far as guest tax. And that may be a possibility that, you know, in 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, that would increase. And then there would be funding there. So, barring any recession or anything like that again.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. So my recommendation as far as the entities that we have on this listing of who would receive the funds would be for our city budget staff, finance staff, to visit with these entities and try to figure out what the best funding arrangements of receiving this money over the 12 years would be, rather than us having to discuss that and to say this is how much we're going to dole out. Is that agreeable, Brandon?
Yeah. Oh,
This
sorry.
Brandon and
Wrong
that
one.
Brandon?
Sure, Councilmember, we could do that. With my understanding is that there seems to be an agreement here that there would be an annual or a total cap on the funds based on the discussion. Is that correct?
Right.
I'm seeing heads nodding.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, would there be annual caps, or are you just talking about total caps?
I was suggesting total.
Total?
caps.
Okay.
So you would work it out with the entities, you know, who are receiving the funding as to that the overall would be the 4.7 million
Okay.
and how that would be spread out over the 12 years. So. I also want to give the opportunity to, I mean, we have tried to really run a committee that is open, and, you know, I know these are a lot of numbers. We have, my inbox, I haven't gotten to all of the emails, but there's probably at least 50 in there that have to do with the TGT committee. You know, if anyone, I want to give everybody the opportunity, if they want to, you know, share their opinions about this, then we have to vote on whether or not we're going to accept the committee's recommendations. So I would offer anyone that wants to speak on behalf of, you know, any of the programs that we're looking at here. So, okay. Jeff.
Hi, thank you. Jeff Carson, representing the Jayhawk Theater. Appreciate all the hard work you guys have put into this. You know, the city's been putting a lot of effort forth in the last few years to help make a cohesive, vibrant downtown. And I think in our application, you read that we really strongly feel like that the Jayhawk could bring a real quick turnaround once construction starts to become a focal point, especially after hours. And, you know, downtown's evening life is not very viable right now, and I think we can make a big difference. I have a question about the Entertainment Plaza and why that amount is what it is and what the major components of that are, and if anybody has an answer to that.
Megan or Kurt or Brett, I don't know if David's in the room, but if any one of you want to answer the discussions about the plaza?
I'll go ahead and just lead off on that and just kind of give a brief overview, and then the others in the room can also add to it. We all believed that each brought their own value. The plaza had its value in terms of being a destination. There was conventions, possibilities, the return on investment in terms of that. We also believe Jayhawk Theater also had its value as well. We also recognize that there are other similar theaters or opportunities in Topeka, and it came down to diversification, but we believe Jayhawk Theater was a very valuable project.
And can you tell me in general terms what the $4.4 million is for the plaza?
The plaza, they requested $5 million. I believe it was a little over $5 million. We got to the number that we did based on looking at numbers of who else we wanted to fund as well. In addition, we also looked at that number based on what they needed to get to that point. But we would have liked to have funded everyone, but we couldn't.
I think the question was more specifically, and I think the question a lot of us might have is how much of that goes into acquisition of the land and where it will be. There are several projects here that are brand new, and that's one of them. Others of us have been working for 20 years on our projects, and we're not here to be greedy about it. We want to. I love the downtown entertainment plaza idea, but I'm a little troubled if some of that money, and I'm assuming that some of this money is going into acquisition of buildings and real estate.
It goes into the project itself, and the applications are all posted online on our website, and you can go there and review. All of the applications included budgets.
Well, then, you guys have a difficult job, and I appreciate all your hard work, and I really insist that you guys have to understand that, and I'm going to have the board of directors that attended this meeting today stand up for me. We have a really powerfully strong board of directors. We really feel strongly that the project is very viable for the first time in a long time, and we really do need all the support we can get so that we can leverage our project and bring people to Topeka to stay in hotels and enjoy the live music and films and all the events that we're going to host. And I'd appreciate the consideration to adjust this amount, if you would. Thank you.
Anyone else? I have Grant. Yeah, Grant.
Grant Glenn on behalf of Constitution Hall. If the amount allocated would be, in fact, passed, the amount recommended would be passed, we'd be thankful for that. Certainly, if there's another distribution and more funds were available, that could do more good. We would say on the issue as to how this money is paid out, that it makes the most sense to us to do it on a pro rata basis annually. We can go and attempt to borrow or raise money and build cheaper today than waiting 5 years. It will more than eat up the interest costs, and if we don't have that commitment kicking in for X years, then what does come in will not be able to buy as much. So that's just from one perspective on that. Thank you.
Anyone else? Brett? And since many of you probably did not go online, even though they were posted, to read about what the applications were all about, and I know the Lodging Association had submitted the plaza, and we had some questions. I mean, if there are questions about what is the plaza, what it's going to be like, and that type of thing. I think Roger's here, who signed the letter as to what the actual project itself. So, Brett, if you want to, as a Visit Topeka representative, want to go into that also while you're up there?
Sure. I wanted to kind of clear some questions that have been asked, I guess, at least from Visit Topeka's standpoint. It is our recommendation that we don't look necessarily at who the money is going to or what the money is for, as much as what the money is going to bring in. So the committee, I urged them, and I think we did a very good job in the 5+ hours we were in there. We looked at the return on investment and how each different project would increase the number of new visitors into the city. So although all the projects are worthy, some of them are going to be very successful, but some of them are going to be more successful due to outside visitors coming in that are going to increase the tax collections to the city, whereas opposed to some are going to be more for local entertainment. So when we looked, especially when I looked, the projects that I felt more comfortable with were the ones that I felt will bring new people to the city. So if you have any questions about anything while I'm up here, I'd be happy to answer.
Well, I think the audience and the viewing audience also needs to know that the $3.4 million for the plaza, what is that going to be? And I mean, are we talking blocks? Are we talking like what San Francisco has by Fisherman's Wharf? And I did hear, I think, and I read in the application that there is another city that has done a plaza and what it resulted in with that city. So if you could kind of expound on that.
I would much rather have Mr. Kurt Young come up and talk about that. He has a lot better relationship and history with what exactly that plaza is entailing. Okay. I know from a general standpoint, I don't know how many blocks it's going to be or how large it's going to be necessarily, but as I've said before in the past meetings, and I've talked to a lot of people, it is another bullet in the arsenal for my organization, as well as hotels and other downtown Topeka, to use to get new conventions and new business to come into the community. It is a area that right now is very hot around the country. There are a lot of different places that have the ability to have a central location, a plaza, so to speak, and those cities are very successful in their endeavors of getting new conventions and new business into the community, because what that allows a entertainment venue, unlike a lot of other places where it's just a convention's evening reception or welcome reception is just in a ballroom of a hotel. So in addition to that, the ability to have festivals, the ability to have other events there throughout the entire year is what I felt that it was valuable for. When I'm sending staff out and they're going to conventions and trade shows to try to find new business, that is something that's going to allow us to separate ourselves from other cities that don't have something like this, where we can set up a concert for them or do some sort of a welcome show. Everybody is going to these trade shows and they're offering the same things. Every city's offering the same things. We have a square hotel room, and we can put your DJ in the south corner of the building and all that, but this is something that's different that we can tout differently than others.
Did you go on the intercity benchmarking trips, or did somebody, I mean, I
I've been, not with Visit Topeka, but I've been on the last 5.
okay,
yes.
and did you find at those benchmarking visits to other cities our size comparable, that this was one of the things that enhanced their city?
Tulsa is a little bit bigger than Topeka, but Tulsa has an area that the 2 days we were there during the middle of the week were very busy during the lunchtime and in the evening. Fort Collins, Colorado has a downtown public plaza, so to speak. It's not as much of a green space, but there's a little plaza right down there that when we were there, there was actually a big concert that they were getting ready to plan. I've been to a couple other cities that have places like this, and every time I've been there, they've been busy.
Okay, Kurt, do you want to add to the idea of what the plaza is all about?
Thank you, Kurt Young. And
Did you hurt your arm in this 5 hours?
yeah, it was a tough meeting.
Lots of
torn
rotating
rotator cuff to prove how tough it was. No, but the best thing I can do and is challenge each one of you, everyone in this room, if you have any questions about the public plaza on our application. At the tail end of that application, there are 2 web links. I believe they're about 20 minutes long a piece, something like that. I can't remember exactly how long they are. Take a minute tonight, go to those 2 web links and watch Roger Brooks' presentation regarding the public plazas. He gives a wealth of information, statistical information, on the impact that public plazas have had in the numerous cities that he's been involved with. I've had the pleasure of going on, I believe, 2 or 3 of the inner city visits. And the one common thing I've seen in those visits is the development of a downtown area. In some cases, they've done a plaza. In other locations, it's a different, maybe a different concept. But that strong downtown area is what has been the success key, or the linchpin to their success. And as Roger says so many times in his presentations, the tourist will follow the local people in the community. Wherever the local people go, that's where the tourists, the travelers and tourists will go. So the plaza really lends itself to developing that core area downtown that, along with everything else that's being done, along with the other 13 applications that we considered Monday, will be an asset to developing a strong core downtown area. But we really believe and felt like, and I don't know how many there are, but there's quite a number of lodging representatives here today that are in the position of professionals that know and have an idea of what it takes to draw people, tourism to town, and keep them not just one night, but hopefully 2 nights or 3 nights. And as Megan said earlier, if we had $15 million and can put it in the hands of everybody that submitted an application and have all 14 of these projects done in a year or 2, it would be Katie bar the door in terms of the success that we could have. So it really boiled down to picking those items, those projects that we felt would have the most immediate return on the investment. As far as where the plaza will be, we don't know yet. As I've said, as I stood here a month ago, we've got locations. I'm keeping that intentionally pretty close to the vest just to protect the value of what we have to hopefully pay for the property when it gets to that point. There is a site that's been publicized quite broadly in Mr. Brooks' report that he issued. I would tell you that's just one of the sites. but not necessarily the site that would be chosen. So take a minute, if you would, whether you're in this room or watching this on TV or sitting behind the table here today, and go to those 2 links, and you'll have a much better understanding of a plaza and what it can do to the community than I could relate to you standing here today.
Any questions?
Any questions?
Quick question. So my understanding is that really for the plaza to be effective, it's got to be done, in the near future. So this funding stretches out over 12 years. How would you get it done in the near future using 12 years of funding? Or do you know yet?
Don't know yet.
Okay.
Quite honestly, when we went into the meeting Monday, we still thought we had $3.146 million of leftover soccer money that was available. We didn't find out until the meeting started that money was no longer available. So the 3.45 doesn't build a plaza in and of itself. Yes, it gets us a lot closer than we were Monday. How we make that happen to the city's benefit as quickly as possible, that's yet to be determined. After this meeting today, then I'm sure the folks that are involved in that effort will be meeting to determine what the next step is. Any other questions?
From this aerial shot here, is this pretty much from Fidelity to 7th Street?
Yes.
Okay. And I see the parking structure there, and the other businesses that are on the south end of the parking structure will remain there?
What I would tell you is don't make your decision based on what you see in that rendering. That is an artist rendering of one site that may or may not be the site that's ultimately chosen. That's 2 different consultants. Vince, help me. What was the name of the previous consultant that picked the same location? Anyhow, there have been 2 different consultants that have picked that location. I'd be the first to tell you that's the most expensive location. Does that make it the most viable? Probably not. So, but that's just a rendering that Roger provided when he submitted the report. One of the things that will happen is that we will actually create a business plan that will pretty well dictate what the plaza will look like, what it will have as far as amenities. We got a lot of homework to do now that we know what money is available and how we can best utilize that. Obviously, waiting 12 years for it to happen doesn't help us. So,
Bingo.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Well, I have to kind of weigh in a little bit because this is a new project. I also know that we have some projects that have been trying to be funded over a period of years, and it is so nice to see the board of one of them pretty much all here. Knowing that, I reached out, and it's called the State Jayhawk Theater, and Constitution Hall, as we know, was the first legislature in the state. I've reached out to some legislators that I know personally to find out if there is a way we can start looking at these entities that they could possibly get some support and funding from the state. Of course, we know that's not going to happen right away with the economy the way it is. But I have seen the pendulum swing so many times in politics that may be a possibility under the future. So it was difficult for me because I really believe in these projects, and we went on the haunted tour. If you haven't been on the haunted tour, Spirit Expeditions in Topeka, it's best to go on a summer evening. But we went on that, and it was awesome. Jayhawk Theater they had something going on in there, and so we stopped by to see it, and people that were with us on that tour were from Junction City, and one was from down south, south of Wichita, I think. And it was really neat to see that, that there was things going on. We also walked down by Constitution Hall in that tour. But these are things that we definitely want to see come to fruition. The same as the Overland Station, that it's something that draws attractions. And I was up at the top of the Capitol one day, the 296 steps, up there with different couples. What I realized up there was we don't have anything that tells tourists, well, you need to go see this. But I did find from Topeka, Visit Topeka, we actually have a tourist map that looks like this. And it's got all the lists on it. So what we have to do is a better job of telling people that come in to stay in our hotels that before you leave Topeka, you need to go see this attraction. One of the discussions that came out of that was, and I have submitted this, Kurt would be interested to know, and Roger, that our city does not require our Visit Topeka information to be in each room. I think if you have all gone on trips to other cities, you go and stay in a hotel, you can pick up right in that room what is there to do in this town. I think that's something that we have to look at, and we have to get this before every tourist that comes in, whether it's to the zoo or to Overland Station or to the Capitol, which is probably the main reason that we have a lot of tourists come here, because we are the state capital. But those are some things that it really weighed heavily on me as to, after I read the recommendations, as to what this committee would decide then. But I have been traveling widely with my husband, who was the state court administrator. We went to most of the state capitals, and I have seen plazas that were awesome, and they had activities going on in their state capital because of the state capital and the downtown, vibrant downtown. So I would hope that we can decide on this today. Whether or not it's going to be, adopted or accepted, that's what our next motion or our next agenda item is. So, you guys want to add anything to that discussion?
I would throw a quick question out there. I wonder if we should put some sort of stipulation in the funding that we have to have some sort of plan to spend it within a certain amount of time, or we can reallocate it, maybe within 2 years or something like that. You have to have started spending this on your project in some manner. I'm not quite sure how it would actually work, but and again, this may be a terrible idea, I don't know, but that way, because the idea behind this, giving this money, is that it jumpstarts these projects and get them moving. And so if it doesn't do that, then I feel like we should probably take it back and give it to a different project that then gives them equal opportunity to get moving. I don't know what you all's thoughts are. I'd be interested in discussing it.
Brendan?
Councilmember, in a case like that, I would probably recommend developing some type of a development agreement with each of the individual entities that could have those types of provision and callbacks.
Okay. Is that something that staff would do then?
Staff would defer
I might be able to answer that. We would have a grant contract, which will contain numerous stipulations on what they need to accomplish before they get the money. And so that could be covered in that grant agreement.
Okay.
I've lost my agenda, but I know where our next one is to do thank you, to approve the funding allocation. So if there's no other public comment, I would entertain a motion from one of our council members what to do about this recommendation that we have before us.
Your pleasure.
Do you see a need, does either of you see a need to reallocate any of the money between the four entities?
Well, I didn't spend 5 hours. I was there for an hour and a half of that 5 hours. And I think this committee really did a good job of really detailing everything as to how it was to be spent. So I feel comfortable myself in their recommendations because the committee was represented by the Shawnee County Historical Society, the Lodging Association, and Visit Topeka. And I think those three entities are very interested in how our guest tax dollars are spent. So I have confidence in the decisions and the recommendations that were made. I would not reallocate the money because I think that they did a good job of trying to figure out what would be bringing in additional money for our city for transit guest tax. I hate that word, transit guest tax. So anyway, Brendan?
What do you think?
Not being an expert in any of this, I would also be inclined to accept the committee's recommendations.
Okay.
So do I hear a motion?
Sure, I'll make the motion.
Okay, Representative Councilman Jensen made a motion that we accept the committee's recommendations. Do I hear a second? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, it does pass. So that we did accept the committee's recommendations. Are there any other items to come before the committee? I would just finish up by saying that the staffing will get with these entities as to discussing the funding. Is that the way we'll proceed? Okay. Mary?
Well, on the September 1st agenda is the charter ordinance.
Okay.
And at that time, I would think the governing body may be reluctant to consider the charter ordinance until they've looked at the projects and approved their projects.
Okay.
So would you like to have maybe a resolution that would accompany that charter ordinance for the September 1st agenda?
Does that sound agreeable to everyone? That sounds great.
Okay, so that they would consider both in tandem.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Plan on that then.
Okay. Is there anything else to come before the committee?
I just want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to fill out these applications. It's really been interesting to read through your projects, and I'm just incredibly excited to see all of them come to fruition. The things that are happening in this community are just so fantastic. And I want to thank the committee that spent all that time looking at those. That was quite the marathon task, and I do really appreciate your thoughts and your input, and thank you to staff for supporting them.
And I would follow that up with, I think most of you know that we had a motion to add a grant writer to the city staff, and here's a beginning of going after grants for our city because you guys have done a lot of work. I used to write grants and review grants, and it is a lot of effort to go into grant writing. So I think this work will not go astray. This will be very helpful in looking at what we can do in Topeka in the future. So with that, I think we're adjourned. So, thank you.
You're supposed to knock a gavel or something.
No. Okay, thank you.